I work at a comfort store at the corner of a little shopping strip. It's fundamentally a littler neighbourhood form of a 7-Eleven. I worked morning shifts for a Whereas, which begun at 3 a.m. and finished at 1 p.m. I concurred to these shifts, since they were continuously the slowest and required the slightest sum of work. All the parts of my work included tending to clients, filling the racks, and taking out the junk, which beautiful much implied I had nothing to do. It was the centre of winter at the time this happened, but I live in a hotter state, so it ordinarily downpours rather than snows. It was a light pour exterior, but it was sufficient to keep most individuals absent. On early mornings like these, I like to incline against the front of the building exterior and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't gathered to, but there wasn't anybody to halt me. Along the shopping strip were possibly 8 or 9 other stores associated to our own. All of them were stores with typical hours, so none of them were ever open until around 6 or 7 within the morning. So when I saw a car drag into the stopping part, whereas I was smoking exterior, I of course accepted they were coming to the comfort store. I burned out my cigarette and hurled it within the junk. At that point headed back interior and around the corner. There truly was nothing to do, so I was fair holding out for the client to come in and take off so I could get back to being bored alone. After a number of minutes of no one coming in spite of the fact that, I strolled back around the corner and checked exterior the entryway. The car was still there, stopped in a stopping space adjacent, but the headlights were off, and as distant as I could tell, no one was interior. Once more, it was gently sprinkling exterior, and all the other stores were still closed, so I was a bit confounded as to where they went. I took one final see around, seeing no one. At that point closed the entryway and went back interior. 30 more minutes of nothing went by, and I think I was fair standing within the same spot behind the counter for the complete time dividing out. I checked the time, saying I'd as it were been at work for a small over an hour, and chosen I should check the junk cans around the store and hurl them within the dumpster out back. I strolled around to each waste canister, putting the sack within the cart and supplanting it with a modern pack. As I was doing this, I listened a swoon press sound come from exterior. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but between the rain hitting the roof and the sound being to some degree distant absent, it was incomprehensible to tell what it was or where precisely it came from. And the minute it happened, in spite of the fact that I scarcely indeed considered it, fair didn't appear like anything worth considering around, fair another irregular sound these ancient buildings made. Once I filled the cart with all the junk packs, I rolled it into the back room and opened the back entryway that driven to the dumpster. I murmured, seeing as the rain was pouring down harder presently, of course right, when I really required to go exterior. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain and over to the dumpster, which was specifically over from the entryway. After hurling in all the waste, I turned back and began heading for the entryway, but I taken note something was out of place. The store specifically associated to mine had its entryway wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there prior than 6, so it made me think. I went back interior to induce out of the rain and went out to the front entryway and looked at the other store's entryway. All the lights were off, and it looked bolted up and purged like it continuously was at this time. I thought for a couple of more minutes, sometime recently figuring I had nothing superior to do, and went back exterior by the dumpster and strolled up to the open entryway. Once more, all the lights were off, but it appeared to lead into a little closet-type room, which at that point had another entryway likely driving to the most storeroom. I ventured interior, standing in between the entryway so as to not make it seem like I was attempting to sneak in or something. Standing inside presently, I may listen somebody moving around in the other room, strolling, opening drawers. It sounded like they were making a mess, which at that point got me considering indeed more. Hey, is everything okay in there? I called out, trusting to urge a consoling response from a neighbouring store specialist. The commotion ceased. I held up a couple of seconds. Sometime recently I realised that this was not ordinary, and something was certainly off base. I ventured back exterior and into the rain as I rapidly made my way back to my store. I recognised something was lost from the entryway I had fair cleared out. It took a moment to figure it out, but at that point I saw that there was no handle. It was fair and purge gap, where the handle and bolt more often than not are. At that point I looked down at the wedge that was holding the entryway open, seeing presently that it was really the broken entryway handle. I ran back into my store, locking all the entryways, and called 911 as well as my store director. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the divider interfacing our stores and put my ear against it, tuning into the suspected burglary taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, since they were moving rapidly presently, running all around, hurling or thumping things over. After 30 seconds to a diminutive of this, I saw lights streak exterior and listened sirens drawing closer the back of the building. The strides rapidly moved to the back of the store. Sometime recently a bunch of boisterous hollering came, which I accept was the officers. I checked out the back entryway after a diminutive, seeing a less boisterous scene, and strolled out to conversation to the officers. I said thanks to them for coming so rapidly and gave them an explanation. The man who was captured was found with a pillowcase filled with about $6,000 worth of stolen things. He too had a purge gun, beside an assortment of instruments utilised to break down entryways and locks, and unconsciously to me, he'd too broken into the store 2 spots down as well. It's vague whether or not the man knew I was working at the time, but my store lights were on, so it isn't likely that he would have broken into my store. But a few expansive scratches were found on the back of our entryway handle, which may have been from a past endeavour. I was driving domestic from my friend's house. It was late. I do not know precisely the time, but in the event that I had to figure it was likely 2 or 3 am I lived 20 minutes absent, which wasn't as well distant since most houses around here are spread out. The rain and need of road lights made it difficult to see, in spite of the fact that, so I was driving slower and more carefully. 5 minutes down the street, I pulled up to an activity light. I had the ruddy light, but there was a blue car on the other side who was on the street somewhat within the crossing point. Its headlights and everything were on, but it was fair sitting there at a green light. I couldn't tell in case there was something off base, or possibly they were snoozing, but when the lights changed, I drove forward, gradually manoeuvring around them. I attempted to tactfully see their car as I passed, but the rain on my window blocked most of my see. As it were a minute after passing them, and driving down the street once more, the blue car turned and begun taking after me down the street, so it wasn't broken down after all. I kept my eye on the mirrors. I wouldn't consider myself a jumpy individual, but the circumstance felt organised. Another miniature down the street, the car's headlights began getting brighter in my mirrors as they pulled their car closer to what felt like fair a handful of feet from my back bumper. In climate like this, that made me truly awkward. I looked back at the street, but saw a little light pop up on my dashboard. It was a flag that one of my tyres was moo on discuss. A common signal, but it felt like an odd time for it fair to pop up given the circumstance. I looked back in my mirrors, seeing the car still following me. They were so near, their headlights nearly made it difficult to indeed see the real car. I was fair 4 or 5 minutes absent from domestic, nearing the entrance to the neighbourhood, when my dashboard begun flashing an unused flag. Level tire. My stomach dropped. The moment I saw that flag, I put all the pieces together and was nearly 100% beyond any doubt that this car behind me had done something. I drove another miniature, trusting to create it closer to domestic, but I might feel my car sinking to the cleared out, and I was for all intents and purposes driving on the edges presently. I had to drag over. The car behind me did the same. I ought to have called somebody as before long as I stopped, but I was so concerned and centred on what the individual behind me was doing that it didn't indeed cross my intellect. In spite of the fact that indeed on the off chance that I did call somebody, it likely wouldn't have anticipated what happened following. Once stopped, 3 entryways opened from the car, and 3 men came out. I as it were had a couple of seconds to plan and respond, but I was defenceless and defenceless. They ran up to my car, 2 on my side and 1 on the other. One of the men came right up to my window, hollering at me to open the entryway and indicating a weapon at me. It happened so quick I was fair in a few disoriented state. I begun to reach for the entryway, but the man by the back entryway crushed something against the window, shattering it. At that point, come to his hand in and opened the back entryway. They were all still hollering, both at me and at each other. The man within the back reached over, opening the other back entryway. At that point come to before me to open my entryway. I was still fair sitting there, holding my hands up presently to appear I wasn't a risk. I knew there was no way out of this indeed on the off chance that I did have a weapon. Once my entryway was opened, the man with the weapon pulled me out of the car and hammered me on the ground. The most bizarre thing is, whereas I was on the ground looking out into the stormy pavement, all I was considering around was how cold and damp the asphalt was, not almost how I had a weapon being pushed into the back of my head, or that I was being ransacked and beaten. I think it was my head attempting to remove myself from the traumatizing circumstance I was in. I wasn't on the ground for long. Some time recently, the men by the car called out, and the fellow holding me down hit me within the back of the head, causing me to ricochet off the asphalt. I wasn't indeed beyond any doubt on the off chance that he hit me with the weapon or fair, his clenched hand, since I was as of now numb. I'm surprised it didn't thump me out, in spite of the fact that I listened their car entryways near and after that driving away. I rolled over, still within the trance, and attempted to choose myself up. They'd taken my phone, so I was constrained to drive my car domestic and call the police when I got there, which finished up scratching and harming my edges besides. The examination went no place, deciding as it were that the suspects had intentionally put little tire spikes within the street at the crossing point I crossed them at. I got fortunate to have as it were hit one spike, and for it to have caused less harm than regular. They likely arranged to snare me as before long as I hit the trap, but within the conclusion it didn't make a distinction. I'm 24 and I lived alone with my puppy Beer in a cosy townhome up until 3 months prior. I moved in when I turned 22, having a decent enough work. I cherished the domestic, being the primary put I'd ever leased for myself. But too, a long time of upbeat living was demolished by this one night. It was bleak exterior and sprinkling very apart. It was my day off, so I was sitting on a chair in my living room, looking over on my phone. It was 8 p.m, which was fair an hour some time recently. I more often than not went to bed. I had been sitting by the back entryway for a whereas looking exterior. He began whimpering and ran up to me, which was his way of communicating to me that he required to go exterior. I got up and let him out. At that point closed the entryway and stood within the kitchen. Whereas it was fair a townhome, there was a little fence isolating the backyards, so I didn't need to stress around Bear running absent or anything. Moreover, I ought to specify that Bear isn't a huge canine at all. He's fair soft and little like a teddy bear. Not long, perhaps 15 or 20 seconds after I let him exterior, I listened him fuss and bark. It was exceptionally clearly a grovelling bark, like he was running absent from something. It frightened me, and I hurried to the entryway and looked out, seeing Bear running back towards me with his tail between his legs. Once he was interior, I inclined my head exterior and checked the terrace, anticipating a coyote or something to be prowling by the fence, but nothing was there. I made beyond any doubt Bear was afirm and bolted the entryway. He never does anything like that, so that made me truly stressed for him. I let him sit on my lap for the rest of the night. Through the following 30 minutes, he was continually livening his head up and gazing at the windows and doors, a diverse one each time. Then, after 45 minutes of sitting there, Bear turned his head and gazed at the window behind me, bringing down his ears and snarling. "There," I said, turning to see where he was looking, and right within the window, fair some feet from us, was a man gazing back at me. He was nearly right up against the glass. I hopped up and shouted, venturing in reverse. The man sprinted absent down the side of the house. Bear began woofing once more from the sudden chaos. I closed the blinds and checked all of the others, making beyond any doubt they were closed as well. From the speedy see I got, I didn't recognize the man. I didn't know who he was, or what he was doing here, or why he was gazing at me. I attempted to tune in for any more signs that he was still around, but the rain exterior was as well boisterous, covering up any conceivable sounds. Bear appeared calmer, in spite of the fact that, so I remained up for a wearer's logger fare to be secure. At that point went upstairs, and had Bear rest in my room with me. It took a long time for me to drop sleeping, having a parcel on my intellect, but after an hour or so, I gradually napped off. When I woke, Bear was standing upright by the room entryway, gazing at it. This was a freaky thing to see waking up in the centre of the night, but not indeed seconds afterward, I listened something underneath me, a man talking. And not long after, a man on the other side of the house talking back. Their strides were boisterous, and they didn't indeed appear to be whispering either. It was like they didn't care on the off chance that I knew that they were interior my domestic. My room entryway was bolted, but I had no place else to go. I went over to Bear unobtrusively, attempting to keep him calm. At that point picked him up, and went over to the corner of my room behind the bed. It took me a while to realise, but at that point it struck me that I hadn't listened any noises at all within the past minute. No steps or voices. This was when I took my phone out and called the police, whispering as delicately as I may. As I told them my address, Bear began a moose snarl. At that point started woofing and whimpering as two sets of strides began making their way up the stairs. I asked for the administrator to send somebody promptly. The two men began talking to each other again, but it was hard to create out their words. "Hey, we fair need to conversation. We're not here to harm you." I shouted, saying I called the cops, and for them to take off. I was freezing, not knowing what else to do. There was a stop afterwards. "We're here to assist you," one of the men said. I didn't react as I was active attempting to suppress my crying. Opened the door. It got calm once more. I seemed as it were listening them breathing behind the entryway for what felt like an entirety diminutive. Some time recently one of them strolled back down the stairs. I couldn't tell where they went first floor, or in case they cleared out or not, but I was beyond any doubt that it was fair one set of strides that cleared out the bedroom door. It was so calm, in spite of the fact that, and I couldn't hear any breathing. Within the distant separate, the delicate sound of sirens begun to induce louder. A sense of security was at last coming back. Once the sirens got closer, I listened strides running out of the house first floor. But presently I was uncertain of where the other man was. It appeared truly improbable for him to be by my entryway still, but I might swear I'd never listened to him take off. I held up for the police to drag up and make their way interior. I listened them looking first floor, at that point gradually make their way upstairs, and thump on my entryway. I nearly didn't need to reply, still considering that other man had to be someplace adjacent. When I opened the entryway, in spite of the fact that it was fair an officer, I instantly told him approximately my concerns. He coordinated me out of the house as one of his accomplices proceeded looking, but no one was found. The as it were thing they were able to discover was watery impressions all around the house, as well as an opened window, which, to be genuine, I wasn't beyond any doubt, in case I kept bolted or not. It startled me, in spite of the fact that, feeling so sure that the other man was still there, never hearing him take off, but at that point there being no follow of him. It made it outlandish to rest at night, having this feeling of somebody still within the house observing me. I moved out 3 months back. It was as well much stretch on my intellect, having a free conclusion like that, particularly since not one or the other of them were ever distinguished or captured. There was no clear deliberate the men had either, which is fair another address, included to the list of instability. Indeed presently, living miles absent in an unused flat, I still sometimes feel like I'm not alone. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Midnight Mysteria, for more amazing horror stories.